So, property investors love to ask Rob and I questions. And they come in all different shapes and sizes and from all different angles. But one of the places we get lots of questions is through our businesses, and in particular, Property Hub Invest. So in this week's episode, we've answered those questions that you just need the answers to.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday property investors come together to be informed and inspired. As Rob said, we get asked lots of questions through various different channels, but our team get asked lots of questions from investors and wannabe investors as well. So this week we are rounding up the most common of those to spread the answers far and wide. And make sure you stick around to the end, because in Hub Extra we're sharing a website that's definitely going to give you a renewed sense of urgency. Our news story this week is taken from the website Property Investor Today. And the headline, Rob, is Young Brits are on the move in the UK, and here is where they're moving to.
Yes, Rob, this is a really interesting news story. The results I'm not sure I agree with. For example, in the top 10, they've placed where I live, and it's quite sleepy around here. I live in Hertfordshire, and I'm seeing more retirement homes being built than funky wine bars. But I think the concept is absolutely true, and it's something we've talked about in a previous podcast where we focused on the rise of city centre living and that continuing trend where more and more people are moving into cities. But what's really fascinating, and observing this firsthand through interviewing lots and lots of people over the last few years, is that people aren't just leaving, very small and remote rural areas. They're leaving other major towns and cities into what they perceive as even more attractive areas to them. And this is often led by the fact that there are more prospects in these areas, and the areas I'm talking about are London and Manchester. The same may be true for Birmingham as well, but we haven't got an office there. But I'm seeing so many people who are willing to relocate after leaving university or going home for a few years and then being willing to leave their home town or city to move to Manchester or London is staggering. It's making those cities really vibrant and a more interesting place to live and work. But conversely to that, what it's doing to the places that these people are leaving from is pretty bleak. Young talent is leaving these areas in droves, and I think that's sad. I think we can do better than that. If you look at Germany's a brilliant example of how things can be done, where their wealth and their prospects is spread across the country, across multiple towns and cities, and people don't feel the need as much to move around to develop their careers or experience a better life. So how do we solve it? Well, better transport links for a start, and then in hand will come better employment prospects. It's not something that's going to change overnight, but it's interesting to see that this is being talked about more and more now. It's something that we've witnessed firsthand. So the episode you want to listen to, if you're as interested in this subject as we are, is episode 316. Don't be thrown by the title, it doesn't mention cities, but that episode is where we talk about the secret trend that no one else is seeing, but what it seems now is that it's not so much a secret.
Contrary to popular belief, we're not just a couple of guys who get on the mic once a week, talk about property, and spend the rest of the week lazing around. No, we run a collection of businesses in the background as well. One of those businesses is called Property Hub Invest, which helps people invest in property by finding investments for them to buy, and also helping people with their goals and their strategy. As a result, our team there talk to hundreds of property investors every year, people who've either started investing and now want to take it a bit more seriously, or people who are just getting going and on the verge of making their first investment. As you might expect, those people ask a lot of questions, even though the majority of them are very switched on and have already educated themselves and in many cases have listened to the podcast already. They've still got plenty of questions about property. So for this episode, we asked our team, what are the most common questions that come up? Because chances are, if people who call in or come into the office are asking them, you probably are as well.
So obviously everyone wants to invest, but not everybody has money. So one of the questions that we get a lot is, how do you get a deposit together in the first place? Now, for most people, they would just answer save. And yes, absolutely, saving is a way of getting a deposit together, but that can be quite slow. There are other options available. You could also consider using equity in your home if you have it. So, for example, if your home is worth £200,000 and you have a mortgage of £100,000, if you were to get a mortgage of 75% loan to value, you would release 50,000. Your new mortgage would be 150,000, and you would have £50,000 cash you can invest. Sounds simple, right? But not everyone knows that. A lot of people are surprised that they can use their equity within their own home. Now, word of warning, doesn't mean you should, and you really need to think about it, what you want and how you're going to use it before you do. But it is a possibility. Another possibility is to get somebody to give it to you. Again, this shouldn't be done lightly, Rob.
Yes, the famous joint venture. You've got the knowledge of investing and maybe some time to put into it. Someone else has got the cash that they want to put to work. So you put the two together and find some way of splitting the returns that come back in. It can work, but it should go without being said that this is something that should be approached with extreme caution and only done if it's someone who you know extremely well, trust completely, and where your goals and objectives are aligned. So we sometimes see people investing with siblings. Maybe neither of them alone has got enough cash, but combined they do. It can work, but you do have to be careful. Other circumstances in which we see people come to Property Hub Invest is if they've sold a business and got a lump sum that way, they've got an inheritance that they're looking for something to do with, or they've had some other kind of event that has led to there being a lump of cash in their bank account. By far the most common, though, is just saving. It's not glamorous, it takes some time, but anyone can do it, and it is at least guaranteed to work.
So, once you've done your first investment, how do you get your second, and your third, and your fourth property? Keep saving? Well, you can. That is one option. But now you're a property investor, you may have some extra options. So, firstly, you should be making a rental profit. Whether you're in this for capital growth or rental return, you still should be making a profit. So as that money comes in, you can spend it on yourself and your lifestyle. But if you can avoid doing that, you can build up a pot and start to save your rent. And it's interesting, the second property, that might take a while. But when you're on the fourth property and you've got 4 income streams coming in, then the amount of time it'll take you to get to the fifth starts to speed up. So that's an option. And you'll find as you build your portfolio, it gets easier and easier to save for the next deposit. Another reason that's the case is that you will start to get equity in these properties, particularly if you've bought at the right price, at the right location, at the right time. Let's say you've owned that property for 2 years. When you come to remortgage, if a surveyor in that area can see properties that are similar to yours are selling for a higher price, they may be willing to put a higher valuation on it. It's going to depend on your area and the amount of transactions going through there, so that's easier to achieve in a city than a small town or village. But whether you're waiting 2 years or 4 years, you may be able to get enough equity out of your property by remortgaging to invest again. And as I've already said, once you get your third and your fourth property, you've got more options. You don't need them all to be winners. You just need one of them to be a winner in the terms of capital growth, and then you'll be able to get another deposit out. So you increase the chances of you being able to grow your portfolio. And this is why we call it the snowball effect. You snowball the amount of rental income you get in, you snowball the amount of capital growth, hopefully, that you get in, and that allows you to carry on building your portfolio. And remember, you don't have to do these things exclusively. You can combine a bit of saving with a bit of rental income and a bit of capital growth through a refinance to get you on your way onto your next deposit. So that's the thing about property investment. The first one is always the hardest to do, often financially and also emotionally. But once you've got over that hurdle and you've got your first one out the way, the second one may feel like it's a while coming, but then the third will be a bit quicker, the fourth then will be quicker again, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. It does get easier with time. If you can keep up the same savings rate that you had while you were saving up for the first one, then that second one will be a bit quicker. Not dramatically, but it will be quicker. Then by the time you get on to number 4 or 5, and you've got 4 sets of capital growth and 4 sets of income, what seemed like very hard work at the beginning is suddenly going to be going very fast.
Another question we get asked a lot, but unfortunately it's very difficult to answer, is how to find an area to invest in. And it's not because there aren't many good areas to invest in. It's because there are a lot of good areas to invest in. And therefore it can become quite overwhelming. You'll hear us talk on the podcast about Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Sheffield, Nottingham, and more. And you think, oh wow, okay, well, which one do I do? And you know what? It doesn't really matter. If you go into an area that is at the right point of the cycle and the fundamentals are strong, which all those areas I just mentioned are, then it's just about finding the best deal you can in those areas. You often see extremes of this. You get people who just are paralysed by the choice. And then you've got others who plough ahead and go, right, Liverpool, I'll buy anywhere. It'll work because I've heard, it's on the up and up. No, with any town or city, think about where you live. There are good areas and there are not so good areas. And you've got to put that time and effort in. Just because, one town or city is looking promising doesn't mean the whole of the town or city will be promising. Yes, of course, all parts will see some growth eventually, but there are clearly better places than others. And that's where the time and effort and research comes in. That could be desktop or, better still, going to meetups in those areas, meeting local investors and getting their perspective. Of course, city centres generally in those areas are going to do well because they have all those fundamentals. If you've got the timing right of where they are in the cycle, then city centres can offer you that security that that people want to live there and will continue to want to live there. So the best thing to do if you're struggling to decide is just pick one or two areas and do lots of research and become an expert in those areas. Or if you're a bit gung-ho and you're about to start buying good places and you don't know them at all, possibly stop. Do a bit more research. Do your best to try and meet estate agents, letting agents, even if you're not going to use them, mind their knowledge, and local investors to understand where are the best areas right now. And if you do all that, you'll be just fine.
And for a recap of the broad areas that we're targeting at the moment, some of which Rob mentioned a minute ago, we've got a video on YouTube running you through those, and we'll link to that in the show notes. Another question that we get all the time, and it's a natural one for people to ask, is what return can I expect from investing in property? Of course, there are two types of return that you can make. There's the immediate one. There's the money that you make on the rent that comes in, minus the expenses that go out. And then there's the longer term gains from capital growth, the value of the property going up over time. People who end up talking to Property Hub Invest are normally prioritising this second type of growth, the capital growth over the long term, because that's the type of investment that we make personally and that we as a company target. The reason that we look for that type of investment is because over the long term, that is where the real money is made. Over 1, 2, 3 decades, if you've found the right area to invest, as we were talking about earlier, you should be making far more from capital growth than you will do from rental income. What kind of capital growth can you expect? That is a very difficult, almost impossible question to answer, and not one that it would be responsible to put a number on because there are so many different factors. It could mislead you one way or the other by giving you some false certainty. But the great thing about property, the reason that we believe in it as a long-term investment, is because even if you assume that over the long term, property prices only go up in line with general inflation, which I think over the long term it's almost impossible that they won't, and if you use a sensible amount of leverage in the form of a mortgage, you end up doing extremely well over the long term. This is such an important concept that we've done a course on this called How Property Can Make You Rich in the Long Term, which you'll find on Property Hub University, and we will link to that in the show notes as well, completely free of course. Now, even though that is what we mainly target, you do of course need to be making some money each month. You don't want to be in a position where you're speculating, where the property's costing you money every month in the anticipation of some gains in the future. That's not investing, that's gambling. You need to be running the numbers, you need to put a cash flow together, see what the rent's going to be, see what your costs are likely to be, and check that you've got an amount of money that you're happy with at the end. Again, it comes down to research, figuring out what all those numbers are, what rent you could achieve, what your mortgage is likely to cost you, what a letting agent would cost you. You can figure out all those numbers without leaving your desk. You don't even need a spreadsheet. You can just do it on a bit of paper and you can work out if a particular investment is going to get you to where you need to be or not.
So the real growth is in capital growth. So then another question we get a lot is, so where's better for capital growth? Should I put my money into flats or houses? And should I go for a 1-bed, a 2-bed, a 3-bed? You get the idea. So what's the answer? Well, it's really going to depend on the area that you're investing in, because you are going to expect apartments to do well in city centres. There's more of them, absolutely makes sense. That's the type of living that we have now in city centres. Of course, out of city centres, you expect to see more houses. But what you can actually see is a flip, and that because there's a shortage of apartments in more suburban areas, sometimes they can do quite well, and vice versa, houses in city centres. There is no best. They all do well. You often hear that houses outperform apartments. Rubbish. Look at the data. The data actually says the opposite, although it does depend on what date range you pick. And here's the thing. It's all about cycles. Over the long term, they do pretty much just as well as each other. But often, there are periods where houses will outperform apartments and apartments will outperform houses. There is no one clear-cut winner that goes on to outperform the other year after year. So you're going to hear a lot of BS around this subject. A lot of people saying you must go for this type. And some people are saying you must go for apartments or you must go for houses. No, go what's right for you. Often, apartments are lower maintenance because you've got the service charges. And if the management company is doing a good job, then it will take care of a lot of the hassle, which makes your life easier. Conversely, though, if the block management company aren't very good, it can mean that you're paying out for a service that isn't very good and you feel shortchanged. It's all about research. But as far as capital growth is concerned, it doesn't matter. Flats or houses, if you're going to build a portfolio, have a mix. That's probably the safest way to proceed. And as for 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, again, very similar. Look for an undersupply in the area. If a particular block has a majority of 2 beds versus 1 beds, then I might be inclined to go for a 1 bed. Or if there are very few 3 beds in the area, I might be inclined to go that direction. Or if there's a broad mix, I might go for a 2 bed because I've got more options in terms of who I can let it out to and who I can sell it to. Again, there isn't no stock standard answer here. And although that's what you want, and I appreciate that would be most convenient to give you that answer, the real answer is a bit of research goes a long way here. And it's only a little bit of research, a bit of common sense and a little bit of research, and you'll make the right decisions. But to repeat, I think it's really important. Houses, flats, which one's best? There isn't a best. They're both great. And both should be in your portfolio to de-risk you.
Another question that gets asked all the time is, will I be able to get a buy-to-let mortgage? Even the people who have everything in their favour on this point are nervous about it. I think people perceive getting buy-to-let mortgages as being a lot more difficult than it actually is. Most people in most situations will be able to get some kind of lending, but there are a few boxes which, if you can tick, then you're going to have the widest range of products available to you. First is having an income. Having an income from employment, if you've got a job, that makes it easiest for lenders to understand. But if you've got a track record of being self-employed or you've got income coming in from other sources, that will normally be acceptable as well. The second is having an income of over £25,000 a year. Again, this is not hard and fast. If your income is under that, it doesn't mean you can't get a mortgage, but 25,000 is the cutoff for a lot of products with a lot of lenders. So again, if you can tick that box, it means you've got the most choice. And thirdly, being a homeowner. If you own your own home, that's going to make life a lot easier for you when it comes to getting a buy-to-let mortgage. But Rob, like I said, if you can't tick all those boxes, it doesn't mean it's game over for you at all.
No, not at all. So there are mortgage lenders out there who will be comfortable with a lower income level. Or if you are not an owner of a property, there are, again, lenders out there that may be open to the prospect of giving you finance and giving you a mortgage. Even for people with credit that isn't perfect, and there may have been 1 or 2 minor mistakes on there, there are, again, potentially some options. For all of those circumstances, you may have to pay a slightly higher rate than normal, but nothing too dramatic. Just, you're not going to get the best rate on the market, but it gets you on the ladder. It gets you up and running, and that's the main thing, because then the next mortgage you get after that will be easier again. So even if you don't tick those sort of basic criteria boxes, there are other lenders out there who will be willing to look at your circumstances, and quite often you'll find lend to you. You just need to work with a good mortgage broker, and that's key here. A lot of mortgage brokers will give up if it's even remotely difficult, and your circumstances are a bit challenging. You need to work with a mortgage broker who's going to push that a little bit harder and ask a few more questions of lenders, because often, with a bit of perseverance, a mortgage can be found.
Another question our team gets a lot, because a lot of the properties we offer are new builds. Why would I buy a new build? New builds are always overpriced. And I understand why this comes up, because often if you'll go and look at a brand new property compared to one that's just over the street, the new one is going to be more expensive. But generally, that's not a direct comparison. Properties that are new tend to be nicer and more modern and have better facilities. And those are the reasons for it being more expensive than another property, rather than just the fact that it's new. It's not like when you buy a new car and as soon as you drive it off the forecourt, it loses a ton of value. Yes, of course, there is an element of that, because when you are the first person to live somewhere, you know it's going to be immaculate. But in general, the idea of a new build premium is a bit of a myth. But of course, Rob, some new builds can be overpriced.
Yeah, new builds can be overpriced, and old properties, that are in disrepair can be overpriced. It's about doing your research, and it's really quite simple. Once you start to do a bit of desktop research, so let's say you're looking at a 2-bed new build home, and let's say it's a 2-bed terrace, then you look at other 2-bed terraces in the area. Now, remember, you've got to compare like for like. So you can't look at a 2-bed terrace that needs a new bathroom, kitchen, and looks like it's probably got a load of other problems that are hidden away, and go, wait there, that one's 15 grand, 20 grand cheaper than a new build, because you're going to spend at least that much to bring it up to that standard. So you've got to be careful here. But then you may see it in a different light, and there may be a property that's run down that has all those issues and is only 5 grand cheaper. Does that then mean that property's overpriced or the new build's underpriced? Well, you can assess that for yourself. But it's just doing this little bit of extra effort, this little bit of extra work to establish what the value of a property is. Of course, then speaking to local estate agents, local letting agents, and if you are working with a developer, you can ask them to say, show me you've sold them for this price. Have you just been putting the prices up as time has gone on the development? Or have you actually sold at this price point? That's something that we do at Property Hub Invest, is always get a list of the sold prices to establish, okay, so what's everyone else paid? But Rob, one of the things that comes up related to this question is, why does Property Hub Invest only offer new builds? And that's a misconception. We don't. We just go for properties that don't need any work doing. So quite recently, as we record this podcast, the last investment we presented to our investors was actually 10 years old. It was a development that was sold together that, because of the amount of investors we work with, we could go in and get a great price on it. It was in great condition and we went and checked it all out, but it doesn't have to be new build. It just has to be ready to go, ready to let. And yes, there are benefits to going new build if you want to be a hands-off property investor, but we're not emotionally attached to it. And if you're a hands-off investor, neither should you. When you look at a property, you just need to make sure it's not going to have a lot of work. It's not going to take up a lot of your time if you are time poor. Of course, if you're one of those investors who've got plenty of time on their hands, crack on. A bit of a cheeky question, the next one, Rob, but it's a fair one. People ask, why wouldn't I do this myself instead of paying Property Hub investor fee? Or why don't I just go direct to the builder? Here's the great news. You do not need to pay Property Hub investor fee. You do not need to work with them. You can do this yourself. And in fact, as crazy as it sounds, we've podcasted on this subject. We've put articles in the magazine about how you can source deals yourself. And we've given you tactics and tips to use. So why do people use Property Hub Invest? Well, one, as you would imagine, getting a deal, getting a discount on any deal that you go in is difficult, and it takes time and effort. And just because you're taught how to do it, the actual practice of doing it may be too much bother for you or unachievable if you are time poor. And that's the other thing. A lot of people who work with Property Hub Invest are time poor. If you have a lot of time on your hands and you are willing to persevere and run through the tactics we've talked about previously, then you stand a good chance of getting a deal. Will it be better than the deals of Property Hub Invest? Maybe not, but it might be close enough to justify you doing it. So absolutely, you can go to the developer yourself, but because of the relationships that we have with them, it's unlikely that they're going to engage with you. And ultimately, we have a contract with that developer and a track record. And if you go direct, you don't. That's why the developers are keen to work with Property Hub Invest, is because we can move very quickly, we're reliable, and of course, we have numbers on our side. We will go and take multiple properties at once off them, rather than one or two.
Yeah, and often that's the appeal for them. So the deal that you mentioned a minute ago, where it's a block that was 10 years old, the whole point there was the developer wanted to get rid of them all in one go because it just wasn't worth the time to them of dealing with individual sales. So that's an example where being able to deal in bulk is the only way you could access that deal. But there are lots of other ways to get deals in property as well. So if you do have the time and the desire to do this, then you absolutely can do it yourself. And as Rob mentioned, we've podcasted about it before. There's been an article in the magazine about it before, and we've also got a course at Property Hub University called How to Get a Deal When Buying Property. So if you go to propertyhub.net/university, you'll find that one along with all our other courses.
Another question we get asked a lot is, do you buy in these deals? And yes, I do. In fact, the vast majority of my portfolio, because Property Hub Invest and before it R&P Property has been going nearly 9 years now, has been built up through deals in the business. In fact, since the business started, I've not gone outside of these deals to add to my portfolio. So I do invest. Some people have a warped belief about my financial worth and ask, do I invest in every single one? And it's very flattering that people think I'm that wealthy. And I do appreciate you think so highly of my skills that I can buy 50 plus properties a year. I can't, and most people can't. Not even those investors who stand next to Lamborghinis on Instagram. They can't. But as we talked about the snowball effect before, when I'm ready to get another one, I can do that through my income. I can do that through my rental return and some equity. However, I think it's well documented on the podcast now that because my portfolio is of a size and at a place that I'm really happy with, my focus and the focus of the business has gone towards development. And that's where the funds go now. So property investment in a different way. And Rob, while you and I may not be as active picking up individual buy-to-lets because of the reasons we just discussed, it doesn't mean our team aren't active. And actually, in a recent investment in Liverpool, it was very popular with our team.
Yeah, there was one deal recently where I think 5 members of the wider Property Hub team ended up investing. And the majority of the Property Hub Invest team have bought at least one through the company. Again, they're not in a position to buy every single one, but clearly it makes sense that they take advantage of opportunities when they can. In fact, one member of our team was a customer of Property Hub Invest before she came to work for us. So luckily for them, clearly they do believe in what they're selling, and it makes their job a lot easier as a result.
Yeah, I think it's probably the biggest endorsement that we can give to the work that we do is that so many people within the team, the vast majority, as you've said, Rob, are investors and invest in the deals that our clients invest in. Obviously, you don't know for certain, but I don't imagine there's many other property companies that can say that. Rob, on the last question, we're not doing ourselves any favours here because the question is, have any properties that you've sold gone down in value or been hard to rent out? Now, as far as I'm aware, nobody's ever sold at a loss. No one's ever had to do that. Now, have properties gone down in value? Well, we've been going 9 years, and have we always hit the mark 100% of the time? No, we haven't. And actually, there's probably been a couple of deals over the years that have just not performed the way we wanted to. And we've learned massively, and the investors we've worked with have learned massively. As I've said, they've not had to sell at a loss, but when we've looked at it a year or two down the line, it's not performed as well as we'd liked. So no one's lost their shirt, nothing as dramatic as that. But have people been disappointed? Yeah. But obviously, on the whole, and that's why we're as big as we are and have the reputation that we do, and our own team invest in the deals, the vast majority are successful. And it really varies, that level of success. We may look at one investment and go, oh, that is nailed on, that's going to smash the others for capital growth. And actually, it just does okay. And then others you think are just steady eddies and good solid investments, and they fly. It's really, really interesting. You can always have a view, and an educated view at that, but the market ultimately is the one that educates you. And it's interesting to see because we've been involved in thousands of transactions now over the years to build up a sense of what works and what doesn't. And actually the type of product we source now has very much been all these lessons and all this experience being put to good use. Those people who are lucky enough to invest with us today are actually buying in a tremendous amount of experience because we've worked on thousands of deals. We've worked in so many areas of the country. We've refined our own strategies through these lessons as well. And that's what's now replicated in Property Hub Invest. So the people who bought with us, 5, 6, 7 years ago were working with us when absolutely we were experienced, but not as experienced as we are today. But don't feel sorry for them because they also bought earlier on in the cycle. So the vast majority of those people have done very well. Now, and this also leads on to, have any properties been hard to rent out? Yes, in the past, some investments were hard to rent out. And I'd say that's for 2 reasons. One, our research was a little off and we hadn't quite got it right. Well, secondly, Property Hub Lets or Yellow Lettings at the time wasn't firing on all cylinders. Remember, that's a newer business. 2-3 years ago, it was very much a new business and still learning some of the lessons and getting used to letting the tremendous amount of stock that we have. So fortunately, our due diligence is absolutely top notch now, and the service levels being delivered by Property Hub Lets in terms of getting property let quickly is top notch. But you don't need to feel sorry for those investors who may have not got their property let as quickly in the past, Because one thing we've always done is offered a rental guarantee. And what that guarantee says is that we will let your property within a number of days. And if we don't, we'll start to pay your mortgage. And actually, we'll pay 110% of your mortgage. So we take on the risk as well because we are confident in what we source. And in the past, occasionally, you know, and we're talking quite a few years ago now, we haven't been as bob on and got it right. But I'm pleased to say today, all that experience is paying off and we very rarely pay out on that guarantee. But it's still a nice peace of mind for the investors we work with. Rob, so we kind of ended on a toughy one for us there, but I think it's really important to be like open and transparent and talk not just about your wins and how, you know, clients have done amazingly, but also just talk about some of the things that haven't gone right, because like all the other questions we've got in here, that's where the learning happens, actually through the mistakes and an experience that we have. But to answer all of these questions has been a balance of assessing our mistakes and our successes.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we make such a big deal about the educational component. You should not be putting blind faith in anyone, absolutely, including us. You should always be doing your own research. You should always be verifying what you're told and making your own investment decisions. And as we've already said, for many people, working with any property investment company is not the way forward. If you have a strategy that involves doing a lot more hands-on work, or if you have the time to go hunting for your own deals and you love doing it yourself, then you should be doing that. And that's why before working with someone, they spend hours talking to our team, making sure that it's the right thing for them to do, getting clear on their goals. So if they do go ahead and work with us, great. They've got all the foundations in place. They know what they're trying to achieve and they've got the best chance of making the investments that will help them do what they need to do. But if it turns out during that process that working with us is not the right thing to do, then that's fine too. They've gone away having learned something. They've not lost anything, and in fact, they go away having learned something and knowing more than they did before they started.
So it's time for the listener success segment. So whether you've been in touch through social media, you'll find us at Property Hub UK on Twitter, on Instagram and Facebook, or you've left us an iTunes review, or maybe, like Zach, you've dropped us an email. And Zach has let us know how he's been getting on and implementing the knowledge that he's picked up from the podcast. He says, "Hi, I've been listening to your podcast and you've inspired me to look into leasehold flats. Your flipping property podcast was bang on for me. I've flipped 4 houses and yes, I make loads of money, but I always end up skint by the end of the renovation. I've now got 1 rental and it has £65,000 in equity. And I'm currently looking at 2 flats in Nottingham with an interest-only mortgage to give me the much needed cash flow. I'm looking forward to listening to more of your podcasts. Cheers, Zach." Well, Zach, that's awesome. You know, the fact that you've been brave enough to get started is fantastic, but then also brave and bold enough to go, you know what, my current strategy isn't working out for me, and then pivoting into something else, I think is great. I think so many people can get wedded to a particular strategy and almost force themselves to make it work. So the fact that you've done as many as 4 flips and then pivoted into something else is fantastic. And that's what, you know, great investors and great business owners do, is they'll work on something. And if it's not quite working, they'll try something else and pivot and go in a different angle. And that's, by the sounds of it, absolutely paid off for you. So congratulations. You deserve all the success you are getting.
Nearly the end of the show, but we've just got time for Hub Extra, where we give you that little bit more, a resource, a tool, a recommendation that's going to improve your life in some way, big or small. This week's Hub Extra is a website called You're Getting Old. We'll link to it in the show notes because the URL's a bit funny. But basically, you go on there, you put in your date of birth, and it comes up with all kinds of stats about how old you are. So it'll tell you how many days old you are, how many times your heart has beaten, lots of events that have happened at different points during your life.
One of the things they point out to you is combining the ages of 2 people who you may be aware of and prominent in the world, and say these 2 people combined are the same age as you. And I must be so old that I didn't actually know who one of these people were. So I'm just that out of loop. I didn't feel old at all until I went onto this website. So an interesting one, this resource, Rob, that you've picked out. I think maybe go in mentally strong and prepare for a laugh. But if you're feeling a bit fragile or low on self-esteem, maybe not the day to do it.
So that's us done for another episode of the Property Podcast. Thank you for listening and let us know what you thought. We are on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram as Property Hub UK. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel as well. Just search Property Hub. We've got another great episode next Thursday, so you won't want to miss that. And before then, we will be back with Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday. So have a great week and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.